Hey there, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. I just want to encourage you guys to go ahead and subscribe and share if you like these shows. It'd be a real help if you would do that for us. We have a special guest on today. His name is Yohanan, or is it Joe?
Johannan.
Johanan, okay.
Johannan.
Yohanan Ratz, and he is a physicist. He has done some great work on the question of, is the universe a hologram? Hey, welcome. So glad you could be on our show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, this is a really weird idea. I mean, the idea that the universe could be a hologram. What in the world does that actually mean?
Well, precisely what they're talking about is it's called the holographic principle, and it was first discovered with on the surface of black holes, not on the universe, but on the surface of black holes. And what they realized was, firstly, you have they start with the question of, can you destroy entropy by throwing it in a black hole? And they figure, well, the second law is pretty inviolate, and there's this weird paradox where you could just seem to just get rid of entropy by throwing it in a black hole, and that didn't make any sense to physicists because, you know, that's about as inviolate a principle as there is in physics. So They did some work on this, and they discovered that if there is entropy contained in a black hole, and maybe the entropy is contained, it's not destroyed, it's just contained in the black hole. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
With the green screen somehow on your side. I don't know.
Yeah, I was trying to show a really cool graphic, but for some reason it came out green.
Oh.
So, oh well.
All right, that happens.
We'll forget that.
Now, so what they realize is that the surface area of the black hole is actually proportional to its information content. Actually, it's like a little bit like the event horizon size. You have a certain amount of information you put in, and then that's proportional to how the size of the black hole, essentially. And then they realized, well, entropy is determined in terms of information content, like how many states there are in the system is how high the entropy is. And from that, they then has this other question of how many questions can we ask about a region of space before it turns into a black hole? And when I say questions, what I mean is, say you examine a particle, okay? You ask questions about, say you ask questions about everything in your room, okay? And there's books in your shelf and your headphones and et cetera, and you ask all these questions, you get all this information content back, okay? But then you could always zoom into another deeper level and see, well, your headphones are not just black and plastic, they have little circuit boards in them, and there's little letters on the pages and so on. And then you could zoom in even farther and, you know, oh, those things are made of atoms and so on, and you have more questions and more questions. And so eventually you can keep asking questions until you get to this limit way down in the quantum scale where the Heisenberg uncertainty principle comes into play. And you ask questions about say the location of a particle, and in the process, you can no longer ask certain questions about its momentum, because there's a trade-off between how much you can ask. And if you ask a question about its location, then the energy, the content, the value in which the energy fluctuates will go up, right? And so from this, they realized, well, okay, let's say we just keep pumping more energy into the system to get more and more refined location measurements past, you know, the level at which the Heisenberg uncertainty principle comes into play. And you can keep doing that as well. And the problem is you can keep doing that, but after a while, the energy value, the energy fluctuations will be so intense that they will have a certain density to them. And so once you get to that level, the gravity starts to go up, okay? You have, you know, more energy or matter in a region of space, and the gravity will increase. And eventually, this will happen to such a great degree that the gravity will be so intense that it turns into a black hole. And at that point, you can no longer ask questions because you can't get anything back out from the other side of a black hole. You're stuck. There's a limit to how much information content you can have. How much information, there's a limit to how much information you can extract from a region of space. Now, when you do this, your screen just went black again. Is that another graphic?
I'm trying. I've had great success in the past, but for some reason,
is it working on your side? Maybe not my side.
No, it's coming out green as well. So sorry, I'm just trying to show show what this actually looks like, so people can see that.
So what happened was they have they asked the question, how much information content can you extract from a region of space before it turns into a black hole? And then the question is, if there's more information content there, then there are certain things we simply can't know in physics, because if you try to get past this boundary, and there's just more going on than we can ask questions of. Or it's less, or perhaps it's exactly equal to the amount of information content going into a black hole. And what they discovered was that that information bound that I mentioned before of how much entropy you can put into a black hole, how proportional to its size, it's exactly equal to, just so coincidentally happens to be exactly equal to the amount of questions you can ask out of a region of space before it turns into a black hole.
The amount of questions you can ask?
The amount of information you can extract. Like you ask, I should say questions, I should say the amount of information. Like, what's the color of your headphones? They're black. There's your circuit board, there's little circuit boards inside of them, the letters on your books in the back, and so on, the striations and the little wood in the shells.
Couldn't you ask really an infinite amount of questions? I mean,
well, that's the thing. You could, but the problem is after a while, actually, you couldn't, because after a while you could ask them, but then as you got the smaller and smaller scales, that whole issue with Heisenberg uncertainty principle will come into play, combined with black hole physics. And any questions past a certain point, all the answers, you couldn't get any answers back, because the answers to whatever is beyond them is stuck behind this black hole event horizon.
Okay, all right.
And so what turns out, though, is that there's a finite amount of information you can ask anyway. And the amount of information you can ask before the region of space turns into a black hole is exactly equal to the amount of information content inside a black hole in the first place. And so what was fascinating about this is they realized this is, you ask questions on the surface of the black hole, you can't get past the black hole. That's exactly equal to the information inside the black hole. And so they realized from this is that we think of as inside the black hole is actually stored as information on the surface of the black hole. So what's going on inside the black hole isn't really inside the black hole, so to speak. It's a three-dimensional holographic projection being projected from the event horizon on the surface of the black hole. And from that, they then realize that the boundary of our universe behaves in a similar fashion. And from that, they come up with the notion of the holographic universe, where what we're seeing here is actually a 3D holographic projection.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
the latter
amazing
one
stuff.
is more mathematically speculative, and it may be something that works mathematically, but it is derived from the holographic principle. So.
Wow. Okay, so basically, but does that suggest that the entire universe is being projected from a black hole, or how does that work?
Well, that was one idea, but there's a more interesting result out of this, okay? That it's actually even more mind-blowing than the holographic principle itself. And that is, they started looking at this holographic principle, and they realized you can translate three-dimensional gravitational fields, space-times, into two-dimensional quantum fields and vice versa. So if you have a two-dimensional quantum field, say entanglement, right? You can map that over into a three-dimensional space-time. Well, one is quantum mechanics, the other one is general relativity. This is, they get into the whole quantum gravity issue. And you can then take the two-dimensional quantum field and map it over into three-dimensional space-time and see what kind of three-dimensional space-time it will produce. And one example of this, pretty famous example of this right now, is called the ER equals EPR correspondence, when they've shown that when you have entangled black holes in 2D, the horizons in 2D, and you map it onto 3D, what it will actually correspond to is a wormhole.
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like Stargate, you go through the Stargate and you're on another planet and so on. And there's this linkage from point A to point B, and they're really the same. I mean, they're far different places. They're two different planets far apart, but in reality, they're, in a sense, in the same place, if I'm at the same location, because there's a little bridge, Einstein-Rosen bridge, connecting the two locations in space. And now when you take that logic and you extend a little further, you see something even crazier, okay? Space is defined by locations. When you were in middle school geometry, you were asked to define a space, I'm guessing, right? And to do so,
Sure.
You'd start with, you'd say, teacher says, okay, give me a zero-dimensional space, draw a point. Now, you got another space, you got another point, and you draw a line between the 2 points, right? And then you say, create a two-dimensional space, and you add another point, and you can drag a triangle, and you can keep basically triangulating larger dimensional spaces that way. Now, it actually works that way in physics. There's something called causal dynamical triangulations. I won't get into that right now, but that's basically how this works in physics. The locations you have to have locations to define a space. If there's no locations, there's no space.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is, well, entanglement, when you talk about something being entangled, when you don't look at a particle, let me explain what superposition is first, and I can explain entanglement from that.
Right.
When you're not looking at a particle in physics, okay, in quantum mechanics, that particle is actually spread out in kind of a smear. It's not in a precise location. It's spread out in a smear of locations, like probabilistically. Or that's what it's projected to be measured as. Now, what's even more fascinating is they've realized recently that the particle doesn't actually have any locations before you look at it. It's kind of spooky, right?
It's amazing stuff. I mean, this kind of stuff I think is just astounding. And, you know, I keep thinking, hey, God created all this stuff. It's pretty fascinating.
Yep. Now, we'll get into how God created it in a minute, that's the even cooler part. That's a little further down the road, though. But so you have these two. So now you can then sometimes put two particles into a single quantum probability wave at once, okay? And these two particles in the same quantum probability wave, when they're put there together, they're called entangled. And you say you measure once, you can have them separated at vast distances, and you measure one, and it will instantly change the behavior of another, even if it's light years away. This goes back to the whole, ER equals EPR thing. EPR stands for Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, who started this whole idea of entanglement, which is then later experimentally proven. So now the thing is when they're entangled, they're both in the same quantum state, the same quantum probability wave together, okay? And because of that, before you look at them, neither of them have locations, right? So if neither of them have locations, and you need space to define locations, locations to define space, then logically it follows that there isn't actually any space between them either anyway, right? Even though from our perspective, from our frame, we'd see them as being very far apart. From their frame, there's no space between them at all. They're just together, even though here we see them as very far apart. Now, what's spooky is you can define entanglement is defined by two particles sharing the same wave function, okay? There is no space there. All of space-time is essentially a construct being generated from this entangled quantum information in the wave function.
Wow.
And so this is insane to think about. There's actually some quotes from Einstein saying this. He didn't know enough about the physics at the time. They didn't have holographic principle, and they didn't prove entanglement and all this stuff at the point, so that they couldn't figure it out yet. But he knew that in order to solve quantum gravity, they're going to have to treat space-time as though it was an illusion. And they didn't know how to do this. He had a letter to David Bohm saying, we have to figure out some way to get rid of the continuum together with space and time altogether. But he said, but then I haven't the slightest idea what kind of concepts would be used in that kind of a theory. But now, this is not just Einstein saying this, is one speculation 60 years ago. This is a lot of physicists are saying this right now. Fotini Markopoulou is saying space-time is not fundamental. There's Hermann Verlinde from Germany. He's Austria, sorry. He's saying basically space-time, the future of this is space-time is not going to be fundamental. We're going to start with information, and then we build the space-time up out of the information. Mm-hmm. And this sounds crazy. This sounds like the Matrix, right?
Right. Yeah.
But believe it or not, this is the notion that space-time is emergent and not fundamental, is the consensus view in quantum gravity research right now.
Wow.
There's a lot of disagreement in quantum gravity. There's string theorists on the one side, and you have loop quantum gravity theorists, and you have smaller models like causal dynamical triangulations and so on. But all of these main models, and then some of the minor models as well, they're all saying together that space-time is not fundamental. There's a deeper layer, and that layer is information.
Which, in the beginning, God spoke, right?
There we go. That's what I said when we get into how God created the universe. That's the thing. God speaks the universe into being. And you see that notion. It's not just in Genesis. In Colossians, it says God's upholding everything by his powerful word. And Psalms, God spoke, and everything came.
It's all over the Bible, right? This idea that
this notion of
God
information.
spoke, it's through language. It's interesting, the word in Hebrew for word and thing are the word davar. It means both. It means word and thing. And it kind of, I still just love the whole concept that one word in Hebrew, the davar, means both. It means two things, word and thing. and that's that's pretty
That's
powerful.
actually very fascinating. I had seen this. I did this once to troll atheists, and I'd seen Michio Kaku. It was kind of a tangent.
Mm.
And Michio Kaku had this clip where he says that he's seen parallels between superstring theory and the Kabbalah, right?
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, that's weird. Like, and Kabbalah is Jewish, and it's not, it's not Orthodox Jewish per se, but there are some, sometimes you see there some overlap with this stuff, and they have this tradition that God actually spoke the world into being out of information, and he's upholding it with these Hebrew words, and they have this whole notion that that's how you get spells, is you can change it's programmed with words, and if you use the right words, you can reprogram the reality. It's like cheat codes.
Yeah. Well, there may be some insights into that for sure.
Yeah.
I won't say they're completely right, but they may
Yeah.
not be completely wrong either.
Yeah, it's
So
just a little thing on us. I'm like, what is that? That is so weird. It's this
I
little
know.
thing just sticking there, and it's like,
Well, what I really love is that the more that these scientists, these physicists, who, I mean, they're not all atheists, but they're not all Christian either, right?
yeah,
And they're in a field which has traditionally been atheistically minded. Okay. And here they're, through their own research, they're coming up to these ideas that, oh my gosh, it's a simulation, it's holographic. In the beginning was information. The very ideas. We may be using different language, but it's the same concept that the Bible says. In the beginning, God spoke, and everything came as a result of that. I mean,
mm-hmm.
it all takes you back to that same starting point, which I just think is phenomenal.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now, what's interesting, I live in LA, but I was invited out here to study at Biola by J.P. Moreland, the big famous Christian philosopher / apologist. And originally I lived in Wisconsin, and there's a cognitive science researcher in my home state, okay, named Giulio Tononi, okay? Now, he has this model. He's an atheist himself, and actually, well, he's a panpsychist, so it's kind of like materialism plus this idea that there's a consciousness stamped onto the matter. So it's quasi-materialist, but not quite. It's there's this consciousness stuff out there that's stamped onto the matter as a result of his theory. But what's interesting, his theory itself starts from a starting point of saying, look, we've got materialists and multiple stripes of materialists. They have different ideas on how consciousness appears in the brain. Then we have dualists, we have idealists, we have, neutral mind. You look into philosophy of mind, there's like numerous positions, and no one really agrees, okay? It's a big mystery. But he said there's one thing that everybody agrees with, whether you're an atheist or a Christian or what have you. And maybe the eliminative materialists don't believe it, but they're kind of crazy anyway. But in general, everyone agrees what subjective experience is like. You have your perceptions and your ideas, and they're yours and rather than mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this information, basically. You can say that perceptions and ideas are information, perceptual information, and platonic information, let's say. And these are ideas that are contained in your mind, as part of your mind, and that's what you define your conscious state as. And he called this integrated information. Integrated means it's part of your mind rather than my mind, or vice versa. Okay. So you have integrated information is consciousness, and it's just simply a kind of a phenomenological way of redefining the problem of consciousness, is saying we don't know what it is, but we can know what it feels like, and well, what it feels like is already what it is in a sense, because it's if you don't feel consciousness, then whatever you're not feeling and you're not conscious of, it's not really your consciousness, so it's
Sure.
So you kind of just look at it from this whole different angle, right? And then he said, so we define it like this, but then he defined this in a mathematical sense, okay? And then there's a little footnote in his one of his original papers on this, and he mentioned that entangled information fits the definition of integrated information because you have the two bits of information together in a state, and you can't separate them. You can't treat them as independent entities. They're part of the same system, and so that would be by definition integrated information, or what he calls consciousness. So according to his model, and as you can see, that model is kind of, in a way, it's not even really just a model. It's kind of self-evident. It's more of a way of redefining the problem.
Okay.
Because it's just, you can't really deny your own phenomenological experience. It's really a definition of consciousness more than it is a theory of consciousness.
Sure.
And so from that, you can actually realize that entangled information fits the definition of consciousness.
Wow.
Now, I just told you that space-time, aka physical reality, and all the matter and tables and chairs and everything inside of that, emerges from entangled information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, put the two together, and you get physical reality emerges from the inside of a conscious state. And that's all science. That's cognitive science, and that's physics. There's no I mean, there's always philosophy and physics to some degree, but in science to some degree, but insofar as you can pretend to separate the two, right?
Right. Yeah.
Insofar as you can pretend to separate those two, that is a purely scientific case that we live. It's not just, there's a hypothetical conclusion of a philosophy argument of therefore maybe God exists. This is more, we can actually deduce from the physics and the cognitive science that we are being simulated inside of a conscious state, inside of a larger mind.
Wow.
The entire universe is a grand simulation inside of a mind.
And let me just kind of jump in there to help people understand, because some people, there is this kind of this bent toward against science. Some people call it scientism, and we understand that some areas of science are just coming up with conclusions that are not based on observation, but those are the minority. The majority of science, okay, such as physics, for example, is actually empirically based. In other words, they go out, they observe things, and then they measure it, and then they do it again, and then they do it again, right? And you come up with the same measurements, or you come up with a hypothesis or a theory, and through testing of that theory in the real world, not just philosophy of where we're you have a nice thought and it seems really fun, and then that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about idealism. We're talking about empiricism. We're talking about things based on the material world.
Well, it is a kind of idealism, but it's an idealism that's not. I mean, you can get idealism from philosophy too, and I have I do philosophy. That's why I'm studying out of your Biola. I can get idealism philosophy as well, but this is a kind of idealism that you can get out of very hard empirical scientific data rather than a philosophy argument.
Well, yeah. And I'm just explaining to people the difference, because some people are kind of down in the mouth on science in general, okay, and they think that all science, I mean, there's kind of a fringe Christian group out there that thinks that all science is bad, and that's just kind of silly.
And I understand where that comes from. I mean,
and I do too. Yeah.
There's been a notion for a long time, and this is kind of interesting because atheists will oftentimes have the flip side of this, and they'll say, well, science is incompatible with religion, therefore we should just dump religion. And what they're not realizing, where it stems from, is science explains things people assume, it doesn't explain in terms of this, but people assume it does. They assume that science explains things in terms of matter, okay? And, well, religion is supposed to be in the realm of spirit, right? And it's immaterial versus material, and so if they think everything that interacts with the material must also be material, they think, then because of the whole interaction problem with dualism, then you have this situation where it appears like, there's this dichotomy, and what's really going on, this so-called science versus religion dichotomy, and whether one is an atheist or a theist and how one falls along those lines, it's really not a science versus religion thing. It's a materialism versus, dualism debate.
Right.
Or matter versus spirit. And so, well, if you get rid of the matter and just say it's all a simulation inside of spirit, essentially, then the problem goes away. There's no basis for the science versus religion dichotomy.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. So, okay, kind of thinking on the movie The Matrix. All right. So Neo gets, of course, he starts there, but once he begins to realize, where he is, he gets initiated into the Matrix. First he's taken into just a blank construct. It's white. There's a chair, right? And all of that is being projected in this computer program. And in the computer program, the laws that we think of, such as gravity, etc., are not really there. They're sort of programmed for the person to imagine that they're there. But in that construct, it's possible to overcome those things. And something that I've been thinking about is, if we are in a simulated universe, in other words, it has some matrix-like properties, without getting too deep into this. But, I've been thinking maybe the things that Jesus was trying to teach us they're not supernatural. Maybe we're using the wrong word there. Maybe he's just trying to teach us how cool the universe really is, and how all these things are possible. And, he's not giving us new laws. He's not breaking the laws. He's just saying this is how the thing works.
It's deeper laws. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I've noticed is, depending on which audience I'm using, I'll use, say, supernatural or I'll say I'm a quote naturalist, and with scare quotes, and I do have to screw with atheists at times. It technically is true because it's all science, right? In that sense, but it's not physicalist by any stretch of the imagination. And so sometimes I'll prefer to use the language physical and superphysical. It all has scientific laws it governs, and these can be understood. But there is a kind of dichotomy where we could say that there is something that is what we would traditionally call supernatural, except that it can also be explained by science, and that would be what I would say is the outside space-time realm versus the inside space-time realm.
That is so cool. So, kind of give us the rundown on this idea of a simulated or holographic universe. Is there a difference between those two, or are we kind of thinking that they're one and the same thing?
There are kind of variations in the same thing, but the holographic universe, there is still a sense of reality because there's still a, even though it's an illusion in a sense, there's still a real two-dimensional space there. But then the simulated universe, or the where we're kind of more going in the direction of just being purely emergent altogether. That is more along the lines of what you're thinking of as a simulated universe.
Of course. And how could anything? I mean, with this a two-dimensional plane, we can't live on a two-dimensional plane. We exist in 3 dimensions.
As a hologram.
So, I mean, are we talking flatland here, and that we're all finally getting, pushed up to be, instead of a square, we're finally turning into a sphere or something like this? Or, I mean,
well, the idea is that it's like you have like a little. You ever see like a holographic film, and you see there's you can look around and look behind objects in the hologram, but it's really 2D. And that's the idea of the holographic universe, is that everything we see as this 3D world is a projection on essentially a hologram.
Okay. And it would be projected from,
I guess, the cosmological horizon at the end of the edge of the universe.
I see. Okay.
Or you can say this is a mathematically useful tool for describing space, and not take it quite that literally, but then you could if you go down there, you can more directly say, it's not even the space altogether is just emergent. It's not even just a hologram. It's just the whole thing is just straight up emergent.
And is there still space if we're talking about a hologram? Because in a simulated universe, there technically isn't
space. It looks like it's a space inside of a video game. It looks like it's real, but you're just walking around inside of a video game essentially. There would be a space of a kind because there would be one dimension of, basically with a holographic universe, there would be one dimension of the space would be an illusion, and you'd have these 2 other dimensions that's being projected from, whereas in the simulated universe, the whole thing is just a construct altogether, like the Matrix.
Okay, so we have 2 similar but not completely identical theories about what the universe might be. One is a holographic idea, the other is a simulation. They have some points where they touch, but we're not talking about the same thing. Yeah. Okay.
Not quite the same thing, but there is a relation, and they both adopt the holographic principle, which is the basis for the holographic universe.
Okay. Now, this idea of the simulation, I mean, I've been listening to James Gates. He recently appeared at the debate on whether the universe is a simulation, hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson there in New York City. And he was saying that he has discovered over his 15 some years of looking at string theory, that he's finding codes, computer kind of codes, the same things that you'd find inside of a website browser. That he's finding the same error correcting codes inside of string theory. What do you make of that?
That is interesting. And actually, I don't know if you know this. When I first ran into that this was actually a dead story, and it wasn't. It was literally, I think, like 6 or 7 links on. I can actually look at go back on the timestamps on like Google search only a certain range, and before I ran into it, it was a dead story for a couple years, and there was a popular thing on NPR about it and an article, and the rest was all technical literature, and there wasn't even that much technical literature. It was like a paper and a few references in other websites that Gates had found this. And I saw this and I thought to myself, this is perfect for trolling people with. So I put this up on my, I didn't even say that it was true. I just put this up because Gates will say that, I said we live in the Matrix, and I didn't say that. What I said was, they look at this thing Gates said, and then I'm going to let the viewers decide for themselves, but I'm going to let them decide for themselves to the sound of Sam Harris explaining the simulation hypothesis to the sound of loud Inception music in the background. And when I did that, I the next morning I put it up on my YouTube. The next morning it had 22,000 hits. And then I look on Google, right? Overnight, the exact same title had been repeated on internet forum after internet forum for like 10 pages of Google search.
Wow.
And people were losing their minds over it. And then after that, it just viraled out of control. And I mean, it was a complete accident. I accidentally started the whole, I mean, I was the one who made that thing popular. And it ended up on,
Wow.
as a result, Gates then got invited to, through the wormhole on the Discovery Channel, where he's explaining, the episode was, do we live in the Matrix? And he starts talking about the computer code inside the string theory equations, right? And then it just virals farther. And then I'm guessing that the reason they had that panel this last year was because this had become popular, and otherwise it would have just been a dead story. And it would even brought up the once on the Isaac Asimov debate way back, and basically forgotten about.
Oh, that's
but now
classic.
they brought it back, and now because of it being brought back, Elon Musk now believes in the simulation hypothesis. There's a possibility that caused Elon Musk to believe in the simulation hypothesis because of doing that.
That is too funny. That
and all I
is
was
too
doing
funny.
was just, viraling and having fun, seeing how the audience was going to react. I literally stopped it together in like half an hour and just threw it up on my YouTube and see what happens.
Oh my goodness, that's too funny. So, all right, so let's explore then this idea of the simulation. I mean, it's kind of a fun idea, right? Because we all understand the basics of a video game, right? We've got a computer, there's hardware inside of there, there's code that's being written. Then you flip the switch on your computer, it all fires up, and now we have on our screen this simulated universe, right? And let's say we're doing a video or a car game, right, where you're driving along, the computer or the program is going to provide the things that you need, such as other cars or a tree or a bridge, only when you need them, right? They don't exist until you actually get to those things. And that's what's so amazing, as we've been studying about quantum physics as well, that the observer's participation in that universe seems to help determine the outcome of it. And the idea of a simulated universe seems to have similar ideas. It also would explain, as you were talking about, the entanglement theory, or not, it's not a theory, it's reality, right?
Yeah, it's reality.
It's quantum reality. It's just quantumly weird, but it's quantum reality of entanglement, right? That you have two particles that are kind of fused, they're entangled somehow, they're connected.
Even their vast distances, there's no signal going between them, and one can say to the other.
Right, and that's what caused
state correspond to the other, like for no reason, instantly.
Yeah, and that's what caused Einstein to say this is spooky action at a distance, as he was trying to disprove this. So in a simulated universe, this would completely solve that problem, that there's no problem at all, because within the context of a video game, let's say, there is no real space. It's only perception of space, but they're all equally distant to the CPU. So this is pretty amazing, this idea of the simulated universe.
So it suddenly makes sense of it. I mean, you see, it's a video game that it's not very far apart. It looks like it's far apart. If you forget you're inside of a computer game, it'll look like it's miles apart. In reality, it's just the same thing down in the, you change one thing in the program here and it changes the program miles away. And that's actually not even the only parallel they've seen in quantum mechanics. I mean, usually this is completely accidental if this has happened, but you play Minecraft or Second Life for that matter, and there are I'm guessing maybe you play computer games, or maybe if you don't, your kids do. And if you have kids, I'm guessing you do. And
my kids do, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But because it's based on information processing rather than matter, there are, it looks pretty real, but if you look down close enough, you'll see these little effects that will occur that do exist because there's information processing glitches going on, right? It's not even just like glitches. It's a natural effect because of how the limitations on information processing will produce these effects automatically. And one example is in Minecraft. If you take cows and chickens and put them behind a fence, okay, if you squeeze the fence in, you'll see that put them in high density, a whole lot of cows and chickens back there. The cows will both cows and chickens will begin passing through the fence. And the reason for this is the computer can't process both the fence and the chickens and cows at the same time. This is, it's a limit in a certain region of space of how much information it can process in that particular region. And so because of that, it can either process the cow or the chicken. It does this much faster than we can see, really. And so because of that is this appearance of this cow moving through the fence or the chicken moving through the fence.
That's called quantum tunneling, is that right?
Yes. And now what's funny about this is that quantum tunneling is dependent on the energy value of the particle. So a higher energy particle will have a higher chance of quantum tunneling through the barrier than a lower energy one. And now when you have, say, cows and chickens, the cows have a higher probability of passing through the fence than the chickens. The reason being is they have a larger program, which needs more simulation space, so to speak, to, simulate simultaneously with the fence. And so the computer will have an easier time processing the chicken and the fence at the same time. And so there's a less of a chance for the chicken to pass through, but there's a higher chance for the cow to pass through. It perfectly mirrors this whole thing in quantum mechanics, where there's, the higher energy value, the higher chance it's going to pass through the barrier.
Wow.
It's not just like a similarity. It even matches the similarity down to the notion of it being, dependent on energy value, or in this case, program size.
That's wild. I love this stuff. That's amazing.
And they didn't even try this. This is just, they programmed the computer, and this starts happening because it's just based on information processing. And this is just how systems that are based on information processing work. And look at this and you see.
Yeah.
You see a number of examples like this. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle can be seen. Sometimes this is actually seen on the edge of Minecraft. And you have this situation where it has to process two different things at once. It can't process both at the same time. And so because of that, it's kind of similar to the quantum tunneling thing, but it means that you see this flashing between two values, and two things. It's not processing one, and the other one doesn't. It's not defined. And you're trying to find the other one, and the first isn't defined, and so on. There's a limitation, and when you realize what that is, that's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The location and the momentum can't be both equally defined at the same time, right? And so because of that,
we wouldn't see. We wouldn't see any kind of. Well, of course we don't know. But if the universe is a simulation, does that suggest that there's not enough computing power to make it all happen at the same time? Or
yeah, well, that's the thing. Is some people have questioned this and said, well, does this mean there's a limitation on God's processing power? And that would mean he's not really omnipotent and so on. And I've seen this objection. Well, the issue with this is it's not a limitation on God. Because we live in an information construct, there has to be certain parameters set on the information construct, not so much to limit them, but just simply because there has to be some framework within which to simulate. And so he has to set some kind of parameters, whether they be very high or very low, simply because those are needed for there to be such a thing as a simulation in the first place. And so it's not a limitation on God. It's simply a limitation God put on the construct for the purposes of running it.
Okay. I'll accept that. I'm not quite sure I fully understand the implications of that, but I'll accept it as being true for now. Fascinating. What difference does it make if it's a simulation? Is there any benefit to us as a simulation? Is there any detraction? How would you see that?
It's an interesting question. Well, it does. I mean, in terms of like technology, I'm not certain it would change anything. I mean, we have quantum technology that we use anyway. It doesn't really. I mean, the fact that it also happens to be explained by this information processing thing, and it doesn't seem to fit any other model really well. That's an interesting side effect, but insofar as it's simulated itself, not very well, except it is also kind of handy at solving the whole science versus religion dichotomy.
Okay. Well, that's very important.
That's a very important, is a sociological implication. That's a very important thing, is it solves the science versus religion.
Essentially we're looking at this same continuum of science, which is all about observation, empirical, where and of course the spiritual religious idea of more of faith. In fact, one of our listeners right now, James Holben, he says that construct is merely your mind's interpretation of input. Physicist Archibald Wheeler stated there is no out there. Everything you experience is a product of your mind. So,
there's an interesting aspect to that. Now, remember Jesus said that, it was not Jesus. It was Paul said that faith comes by hearing the word of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And at first you think, well, what is that? And for a long time, I kind of struggled with the concept of faith. I mean, not that didn't believe God existed, but I had to struggle with the concept of faith because it seems so frustratingly irrational. I mean, like, you're supposed to believe things you don't, is evidence of what you don't see. Well, what does that mean? Evidence of what you don't see? Like, what? It's just kind of frustrating. And, well, I realized what's actually going on, and then I'm like, oh, well, you can say the word of Christ comes like the Bible, which is also true, but more fundamentally, it said God, God's upholding everything by the power of his word, and the word was God, and the word is God. It's Christ, right? Christ is upholding the universe essentially, and so there's word there. And well, here's something interesting. They call this quantum cognition in cognitive science, and what they've discovered is that what's your favorite ice cream?
Oh, I guess chocolate.
Okay, what's your second favorite ice cream?
Something with caramel.
Okay, so let's say you get caramel nut and chocolate, and you put them both in the freezer, okay? But then you go to the door, and now sometimes you might pick your favorite ice cream, but sometimes you'll waffle and say you go for the caramel nut, right? But when you do, you don't pick it right away, do you? You kind of you stand there and waffle for a second, don't you?
Sure. Oh yeah.
Well, if you were
sometimes a long time.
If you were a classical Bayesian computer, you wouldn't do that. You'd be, just be like Terminator logic, and it would just be compute chocolate, and you just pick it out, or compute caramel, and it would just pick it out automatically without hesitating at all. But you don't do that. You hesitate, and you don't behave the way you would if you were a classical computer. And what they've discovered is that this waffling behavior of like kind of deciding, well, I want chocolate, but I want caramel, and not really knowing that you kind of two are both in limbo together. It actually exactly mirrors the concept of, they first realized this kind of behaves like quantum superposition. And then they did like careful studies on this, and they found that not only does it look like it, it behaves exactly identically with the notion of quantum superposition. And so they actually now model your cognitive processes as superpositions of wave functions. Now, as I pointed out, the wave function, even though we map it into space as a wave, right? Even though we map it into space as a wave, it's not really it's actually outside space-time. And so if we treat this as literal.
So what is outside? The position of the electron, or what's outside of space-time?
The state that defines the position when you look. So there's the quantum system that's rendering the virtual reality you see. And that quantum system, even though we kind of map it, project it to be in space-time, it's not in space-time at all. It's underneath space-time, and space-time emerges from it. And so emerges from Hilbert space, which you would kind of call the supernatural realm, I guess.
Okay.
So, your mind basically behaves as though it's quantum superpositions.
All right.
And which is interesting because it means your mind is actually behind space-time, if that's true. And there are reasons to believe that. Yeah, it's crazy. Now, that sounds crazy, right? But I'm going to spook you out in just a minute, okay? I'm going to tell you that you already knew that. And that it's actually even though it's crazy and spooky, it's actually the most intuitive thing in the world. And when you see it, your whole perspective on reality is going to shift. You're like, what on earth? Okay.
Right.
Think of a number. What number you
got? Should I tell you, or is it a secret?
Yeah, tell me.
7.
Okay. Now, where is the number 7 located spatially? If I open your brain up, can I find the number 7 somewhere floating around in the neurons?
I don't think so.
No. You don't think so. And you could say it's located in this moment of time, but this number 7 is sort of non-temporal in a sense as well. It's there, Your mind is accessing a platonic form, information, outside of space-time. Now, if quantum cognition is true, that number 7 is located in the wave function as you're thinking about it, and it's located outside space-time on the physics. It's the same, that the notion that the ideas are outside space-time that you kind of just intuitively get from thinking, that is the same not in space-time. If you take the quantum cognition literally and you combine it with the emergent space-time, that's the same not in space-time as your perception of platonic forms being, quote, outside space-time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you're
Isn't that
blowing my
spooky?
mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing about this is that's just your mind. There's, other ideas that are behind all the other objects around you. Okay.
Hmm.
And you don't have access to those things because your consciousness is kind of cut off, so to speak, from the consciousness simulating the world. And that's kind of the idea of the whole fallen state. You're cut off from God in the fallen state. And so that's maybe why we see the world as material, is because we're not connected to the mind simulating the whole thing. Or if
Oh
we are,
my.
it's not as, isn't that
That.
spooky?
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, we're cut off from the mind of God ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
who is the simulator,
Mm-hmm.
right? And only when we get connected back with that mind do we reestablish that link, that quantum link,
Mm-hmm.
and yet our minds, as what you're suggesting, through quantum cognition, that we have the potential to already tap into that, but we so
Mm-hmm.
often don't because
We're in the fallen state. And so,
we're in that fallen state. Okay.
yeah. So now what's fascinating about this is you ever hear something from God and then it comes true? And this might sound like, atheists will say you're hearing stuff in your head and you're talking to imaginary voices and all that. But for example, and I told you about this the other night, and it was related to that weird situation I've been dealing with. I was told that I was going to come out to California by the end of the year and actually meet a certain person on a certain day, like a very specific day. And I had no idea how I was going to out to California. I thought this has got to be my imagination. This is, I think this sounds like God, but this is crazy. How is this even possible? I'm like, well, then this next thing happens, and there's this prophecy at church, and it involves my situation, and then this JP Moreland shows up, and I get invited out to California, and then this event happens where I meet this person by the end of the year, and the specific day that I was said it was going to happen at, that happened.
Wow.
And I look back and I'm like, I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I mean, that sounds crazy, right? I mean, it just sounds like, to a materialist, that will sound like magic. To a regular Christian, it'll sound like a miracle. And in a sense, it is a miracle, or prophetic, etc. But then you look at it from this quantum cognition perspective, and you realize, well, God's simulating the universe, and there's this outside space. I mean, you think normally when you don't think of this whole thing, you just think, well, there's these platonic forms you're interacting with outside space-time. And even if, say, you're a materialist and you don't believe in platonic forms, you can certainly grasp this notion of this intuition of there being ideas that are not spatially located, even if you'll say this intuition is an illusion and so on. But this is still something intuitive, even if you don't believe in it, right? So, what's fascinating about this is that it's not just these platonic forms in your mind, or that your mind are connected to in this outside space-time realm. There's this larger idea space, and sometimes those ideas, or information, say from God, or in other cases, say if it's a demonic attack or so on from other sources, that can come in, and interact with your mind, and you pick stuff up that, if you didn't know how this whole simulated universe thing worked, it would seem like magic in a sense,
Right.
And
I think
it's not. It's just you're interacting with the source of the information, the source of the simulation, aka the Word of Christ. You're having faith that this is how the simulation is, because you're actually interacting with the program, and so it's evidence of things not seen, because it's evidence of stuff that is, in the simulation, or in the program of the simulation, but it hasn't manifested in the simulation itself. But that it will manifest in the simulation because it's in the programming. You've read the program of the game before you've actually, played the game, so to speak. And so because of that, these things are going to pop up in the game. And, if you think of the world of material, it looks like, well, this is crazy. How are you doing this? But, in reality, it's just all it is. It's you're accessing the program and you're getting the information, and, well, naturally it's going to manifest in the game as well when you.
Well, what's amazing about the idea of the simulated universe is it even though it's kind of freaky in its own right, but it kind of demystifies this the religion experience. It takes away some of the mystique of
it does, in a sense.
Religion.
And I've seen people say this, and I think in a way this has been kind of, I realize this actually has caused problems with me sometimes too, but two things on that. Firstly, yes, it does in a sense, but at the same time, it also brings a sense of like wonder to it, like.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Totally.
paleontologist, okay? And this paleontologist digs up dinosaur bones for his whole living, okay? And he has this mystique about them because he doesn't know what they look like and he behave like, and he kind of like has this, he picks up glimpses of it, but you never actually see what it really is, and it's a mystery to him. And in the same way that these, religious experiences are sort of a mystery, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then one day, a eccentric billionaire who owns a Costa Rican island invites him over to his island, and then lo and behold, suddenly he sees something that demystifies all of his experiences about dinosaurs. But he's completely blown away as a living brachiosaur walks in front of him, right?
Sure.
And so yes, it does demystify in a sense, but in another sense, it replaces that demystification with this sort of sublime, like mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean,
it's suddenly, it's not a matter of a mystery. Yeah. God is not sort of this thing, and this is something I've noticed, and I've noticed myself do this, and I've noticed other Christians do this. Even though we believe the Bible and so on, we read something, and there's a sense of it almost feeling like an atheist will point this out. They'll say it's like, you believe in talking snakes and donkeys that talk and etc. And it's like it doesn't really feel like it would fit into our real world in a sense. Mm-hmm. We believe it, but we kind of like put it in a box and we say, well, it doesn't feel real. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But
this suddenly makes it feel real because now all of a sudden, all these crazy things that just seem like they are part of a comic book essentially, or a fairy tale or whatever, suddenly they take on a new reality that you didn't expect them to take on. They become more real in a sense. Like suddenly it's no longer a comic book or a fairy tale. Now it's something that could very well be possibly real and in a way that makes sense and so on. And it's rather mind blowing that way. And so
it totally is. And, the rabbis have long thought that we exist in the mind of God, that the universe and everything therein is simply a construct in his mind, so that would sort of make him the computer, as it were, and we're just the players in there. I mean, that's kind of the idea of the simulated universe, is that there's
that's what
computer outside of us, and if you're in the video game, to try to actually discover the computer is very difficult, right? You can start looking at the source code, you can start saying, my goodness, there's source code here, and I think we're it. We are this. We're the code.
Find this error correcting block code inside of his superstring equations.
I mean, that was amazing.
Tyson is tripping out. He's like,
I know.
What?
Yeah, he's like,
just be silent for a minute. I have to take this in.
Do you mean there might be a God? Oh my gosh! I mean, this is so ridiculous.
You saying there's some being that programmed us, like in the Matrix?
But what I noticed.
That's what you said.
Oh, I know. Well, what I noticed though is that they still think it's some snot-nosed kid that is just a really good hacker, because they're like, well, there's no way that I'm going to worship this guy.
There
right?
is an argument out of that,
Yeah.
And this is not an argument out of it being because there could be hierarchies of simulation. That's possible, but there is an argument out of that, and that is as follows. Okay, remember I mentioned the whole thing about quantum superposition? The state could be in two places at once, or two states at once. Right. And when you take this to quantum computing, you have this notion of a qubit, and depending on how many superpositions you add onto the qubit, you can have many ones and zeros stacked into a single bit. Now, the fact that you can do this and have these superpositions, it's the effect of it being, the whole notion that there is this quantum mechanics thing, it's the result of the universe being information theoretic rather than made of matter, okay? So that being the case, if there was a, quote, real world above ours, like a real material world, and ours was just a simulation inside of the material world,
okay,
then that world would not have quantum mechanics in it. It would not have these superpositions of states. You'd have, all just chunks of matter and no actual stuff, right?
Okay.
Now,
okay,
because of that, if you were to take all those quantum states, okay, that are in the simulation, and you were going to put them back up in the upstairs world where you can't superpose states together, that means you would have to unpack all of those zeros and ones out of the qubits, and put them in as discrete individual states. So say you had a hard drive, a quantum computing hard drive full of these bits, and it would be literally, 10, like, it wouldn't even be like, conventional numbers like trillion or quadrillion or et cetera. It would be done in terms of, it would be described in terms of order of magnitude, 10 to the 60th power. 10 to the 70th power bits and so on in this thing, and it would just keep going up,
Okay.
exponentially for how many particles you add in to superpose. But if you were to unpack all of that, now imagine taking your hard drive and taking all those qubits and then having to unpack them into classical bits. The amount of hard drive space that would take up would be very quickly way out of control, wouldn't it?
Sure. Oh yeah.
Like pretty soon you'd have to have whole servers, and then not just whole servers, you have to have like to build like servers the size of literally the size of the state of Texas. Okay, and then we're not even talking, we're just talking the single quantum computer. We're not talking about all the qubits and superpositions that exist in reality as things. And so if you were to take a universe like ours that has based on qubits and put it into a classical quote unquote real universe with the the computer hacker kid upstairs, you'd have this situation where his computer would have to be larger than his universe. Like you had to build a computer exponentially larger than the size of the universe to simulate our universe with all its qubits. And so obviously no one's going to do that, and such a thing would slow down, like instantly, and you couldn't run such a thing. And so because of that, if we are being simulated by some, pimply teenager in his garage in the next universe up, then it would follow that the universe in which he exists must also have qubits in order to pack this kind of information density in to simulate our world. And therefore, his world would also have to have quantum mechanics and therefore also be simulated.
Oh my goodness. So you still end up at the same place.
What's really cool is that you cannot be just, you could have the pimply kid, but even if it's the pimply kid upstairs, his world would also have to be simulated inside of information. So it cannot be grounded on a material base, because if it is, you have this information unpacking problem.
Wow. So ultimately the only being with enough computational power is God himself.
Yeah. And remember, I point out the ontology has to be information rather than matter at bottom, even if it is being simulated. And then when you get to information, you realize, well, information, I brought that the whole Giulio Tononi with his integrated information theory, and just the fact that, information is by definition something that someone is informed of. It means the notion of information entails consciousness and idealism.
Right.
And so therefore, because it's information at bottom, it does not even as a matter of like philosophy, just as a matter of science, it has to be grounded in a conscious state at the top. It can't be, even if it is a quote unquote pimply kid, his universe also has to be simulated, and it has to be simulated on information.
Yeah. Let me just read this from Colossians 1:15. It says, speaking of Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. I mean, that's just powerful stuff right there.
Oh, yeah.
In him all things consist, right? And it sounds like we are just beginning to grasp what was revealed on sort of a faith basis to the writers of the Bible. And now we're beginning to understand physically, metaphysically, on the physics level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're beginning to understand what some of these things might actually mean. And I think it's blowing our mind, And again, God is the one who is the source of all this. He is information, and language and information. They're maybe not exactly the same thing, but they're pretty darn close, right? That's why you have a computer language. You're writing a language when you're programming a computer. And so God is the source of all those things. Now, I've got a couple of questions here from the chat room. James is asking, he's suggesting that our minds work more like a receiver than a computer at times. That's an interesting idea. I watched a video on that idea. Yeah.
When I looked at the whole inner space thing, and you're picking up this stuff from, which is spooky because it means that your imagination is in some sense more real than the world that's out there, because it's part of the, it's almost kind of, if it's Plato's, world of the forms concept, where the forms are more real, and you think, well, no, the forms are abstractions. Well, no, what we're calling abstractions is what is simulating this information construct of a physical world. Because they're like, oh, but it's going, you take the quantum cognition, tie it into the emergent space-time, you see these ideas are what is more fundamental than physical reality.
It just blows my mind. He's wondering,
like this. You're in a dream. You ever have a lucid dream, and you're in the dream, and you suddenly realize that the world is actually a dream
Right.
that is
Sure.
being generated by your mind. And when you can do that,
Yes.
you can start to control stuff and so on.
Hmm.
Well, when you do that, what you realize is that the world is, it's fake there, but it's actually being controlled by your ideas. Now, if you thought in the lucid dream, because lucid dreams can be very real, before you wake up in it, before you realize it's a dream, you think it's a material world. And if you think it's a material world, you're going to think, well, your ideas are just, those aren't real, those are abstractions. And what is real is this external world outside, right? This matter.
Hmm.
But you realize it's a lucid dream, you're like, no, the matter is it's an image being generated by what's in my mind, and what's in my mind is more real.
Hmm.
And what's spooky is when you combine this, quantum cognition and tie it to the emergent spacetime, you see that that's not just the case for lucid dreams. That's how our world works too.
Isn't that
Our
crazy?
world is
Do
no
you ever see?
different, literally no different. The only differences between a lucid dream and our world is, number one, it's being ultimately simulated in God's mind, and we're disconnected from God, so it feels more real in a sense, because it's we don't have, we're kind of cut off from the access to the source of the simulation, or at
Hmm.
least to some extent. Number two, it has more players in it, and number three, it's larger in size. Other than
Yeah.
that, there is no difference. You could actually, in theory, I'll remember I said those information processing effects in computer games, and how I had that whole video you commented on, and they were numerous examples in relativity and quantum mechanics of
Hmm.
information processing effects. Well, that's just a result of information processing systems, and your brain operates the same way. So when you have a dream when you sleep, it's literally no different in terms of information processing effects. If you did experiments in that dream, you could find relativity and quantum mechanics just based on the result of them being information processing effects.
Hmm.
And this is just be inside your dream. And so it's literally, it sounds spooky, but our world is literally no different than a lucid dream, except for that it's larger in scale, it's simulated by God, and it has more players.
Have you ever seen the movie Inception with
Oh yeah,
Lane? Oh, that's just that's a
it's very
trippy
much like
movie, right?
Inception,
Oh,
because
that's
there's one person who's the
yeah.
architect of the dream, and
Uh-huh.
obviously not everyone has access to his mind. And so if you're
Right.
another person, and of course he has a larger, he works the whole thing out. It's not just something he randomly dreams, it's a larger size, because he works at the whole scope of the thing first. So it's larger in size, it's someone else, namely the architect simulating it, and it's multiplayer.
Hmm.
Literally, our world is Inception.
That's
Now let
pretty
me
crazy.
show you something really cool you
Yeah.
can do with it. Okay,
Yeah.
so this spook everyone out. Okay, now there's another way you can deduce this whole idealism thing, but let's you forget that for now. It's a philosophy argument. But let's say everyone is inside God's mind. Okay, your value set is inside your mind, my value set is inside my mind, and there's a whole lot of other value sets out there, right? All those value sets are inside God's mind, so therefore they're also inside God's mind, because everyone else is inside God's mind. Okay,
Hmm.
so therefore God also has a sense of value, and because God is containing all these other minds, his value set is universally intersubjective. Meaning, if everyone was aligned the right way, they discovered that their value sets are not in conflict with God's value set. It's all in harmony. Okay, so
Okay.
there's this kind
Right.
of universal sense of goodness, and it's God's sense of goodness, not
Hmm.
because God is just some kind of arbitrary divine command, but because he has this universally intersubjective frame that defines him as being good.
Okay.
So therefore, he creates based on this value set, and everything he creates is good, right? Because
Right.
he can only
Hmm.
create out of good intention. So therefore, evil can only come in through some kind of an absence, right?
Okay.
That's the whole doctrine of privatio boni, which I'm sure you're familiar with from St. Augustine, right? This is the way I just derive privatio boni in a very robust fashion from this thing, right? So now, because of that, whenever you have evil, you have to have good as well. Evil can't exist in a vacuum; it has to exist as C.S. Lewis said, a parasite on good. Okay. But now let me shift your focus to something else for a second. Let's say you were colorblind, you never knew what the color green was like, right? You didn't have the knowledge of green. But now let's say you did have the knowledge of green suddenly. You could then have dreams where you saw physical manifestation of like grass and trees in your dream that were the knowledge of green, correct?
Okay.
Based on the knowledge, it was being generated by the knowledge of green. Your subjective inner knowledge of green was generating or simulating this external appearance of green on trees, apples, and grass, and so on, right?
Okay.
Now, by that same logic, if the knowledge of X produces the actual thing inside the simulation, okay, then let's say evil exists in the simulation. Well, what would be producing it by that logic?
What would be producing
What
the
would
evil?
be simulating the evil? And if knowledge of X, knowledge of green, knowledge of red, knowledge of loud produce red, green, and loud inside of the simulation, then
The lack of knowledge? Is
no,
that the idea?
take the same logic and
Okay.
just plug the thing in. Knowledge of X, knowledge of
Okay.
evil will produce evil in the simulation, right?
Okay.
Just very logical. Now,
Okay.
evil is an absence of good, and you cannot conceive of evil without good with this whole, what I just derived, right?
Okay.
So therefore, in order to conceive of evil, you have to conceive of good as well. So you can't just have an isolated knowledge of good. You also have to of evil. You also have to have a knowledge of good to simulate evil, right?
Okay.
Therefore, in order to generate evil inside your world, that evil must be generated in this, this simulation model in terms of the knowledge of good and evil.
Hmm.
Does this blow your mind?
Yeah.
It's
It's awesome. I was just thinking of the passage where it says that God created evil, and I've always understood that to mean that He's created the potential for us to make choices
yeah,
that
and he's
he
not
doesn't
really
like.
creating evil. It's an absence. It's a think
Well,
of it
He's
like
creating
this.
the potential for us to choose something that is not a good choice.
Let's
But
just put it this way. There's another sense. I mean, Calvinists will take this and they'll say God's actually creating evil and doing evil, and I just cringe. I mean, especially with some of the things that go on through. I'm like, it just drives me crazy. And then I realize what's really going on is not that at all. It's say I take a glass. So you have a glass in your house, okay? That glass is good, okay? And say I created that good glass, okay, or whatever. But now someone drops it on the floor and it all shatters.
right.
You can cut your feet on all that glass, can't you? That's
Sure.
all bad, even though it was part of something good. And in that sense, quote unquote, God is quote creating evil, unquote, because he's creating something that was good, but it was all part of something that was.
It was perverted, basically.
Yeah, exactly. He's not creating. He didn't create he created the shatter. And so the thing is that evil, you can't just, when I say evil is an absence of good, you can't just have stuff disappearing and God's mind is like Swiss cheese or something where it's just stuff, vanishing. It doesn't work that way. The stuff has to be conserved. And so information is conserved there. And so there's the evil comes in terms of a local privation of something being, the other parts are out there that just broken off.
Yeah.
God didn't create.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting, the whole idea of evil. I kind of take Isaiah 45 as the starting point there, where God says, the Lord, He says, I form the light and create darkness. So how did God create darkness? I mean, it's really weird when you think about it, because we think that darkness is simply the absence of light, but before He made the world, there was no such thing as darkness, right? That was a completely unknown idea. And then
I see that verse in much the same way that I would say someone puts a tree up, okay, and the sun shines in the tree and casts a shadow,
right?
And so it'd be like saying, I, the sun, create light and shadow. I, the sun, create all these things. And no, the sun, yes, you can say the sun is casting a shadow, creating a shadow, so to speak, but it's not really the full picture. It's not like he's, it's not like God is out there actively let's go screw with Job's life because we want to test him and and do all
and
this.
God is malicious in that sense.
Yeah,
he's not malicious.
But what's really infuriating is you have some people saying, "Oh, he's malicious, but it's good because it's according to his will, and you better get used to it."
I don't accept that at all. That's like the
drives
very
me nuts.
idea. I know.
Way too often. It drives me insane.
Yeah, because God wants to torture you, therefore it must be good. You're like,
oh? And don't worry, he's doing it for sanctification or for growth or
yeah, I know.
You just want to oh my goodness, you're so angry about this, and
I know you want to clock him upside the head, like shut up.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Anyway,
so James had he had a question though. He wanted to ask if you think consciousness is local or non-local.
I would say that is non-local, and that ties into the whole quantum cognition thing. Now,
okay, all right.
A lot of materialistic physicists, cognitive, most physicists don't even address consciousness because they kind of put it off to the neuroscience camp, and most of the neuroscientists are materialists, and they don't even they're very dismissive of philosophy of mind, which is, I mean, you can't really study the mind with just neural correlates, there's much more to, the hard problem of consciousness and the whole thing with platonic forms. And so I would say there's some literal version of quantum cognition that needs to be true, because you can't explain how your mind can, access these platonic forms otherwise outside space-time. And so it's outside space-time. It's part of the simulating realm, and so it would be non-local, right? Meaning not in space-time, or not not at a location in space-time.
So my consciousness, your consciousness, the things that I'm thinking right now are not localized, right? And they're not in space-time. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. And then we can kind of map that over the quantum cognition thing, with the quantum state that is defining. If you treat the quantum state and your cognitive state as the same thing by treating quantum cognition as literal, then you see that even in the physics, that quantum state is also not in space-time.
So my consciousness that I'm thinking is up here, or maybe in my heart, or sometimes in my gut.
It's not there.
It's not there. It's out.
It feels like it's there. And the reason is, think of it like this.
Yeah.
In a computer game, you have an avatar. You have there's a little generated program person, okay? And you're driving that avatar around. And when you're driving the avatar around, you're in the game, so to speak. And if it was a virtual reality, you'd be more literally in the game. And so literally your body is just an avatar, and your mind is actually located outside of space-time. Now, what's fascinating about this, and a lot of people don't realize what this is, you've seen this discussion of spirit and soul in the Bible, right?
Sure, yeah.
And most people just think, okay, it's all this like two different aspects of this soulish thing, and it's all really just the soul, and they don't really grasp there's a difference between spirit and soul. And it seems very kind of cloudy and opaque, the difference between these two, right?
Okay.
And I always thought that myself as well, right? But then you look at it carefully and you see, well, the first time this is referenced was in Genesis, when God said he breathed the breath of life into Adam, and Adam became a living soul. And then it talks about the breath is like ruach, which is referring to spirit, essentially. When they talk about breath, it's always referring to spirit. And there's,
sure,
Spirit of God hovering over the waters, and, referring to breath and so on. And what you realize, well, so you have spirit injects into body, creates soul, okay? And you see the same pattern. Whenever you see spirit and soul elsewhere, you see the same exact pattern.
Spirit injected into body makes soul. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, that's what's in that's in Genesis, and then you see the same parallels. Also, you do a very careful word study of spirit and soul in the Bible, you see the same thing. And obviously, God made Adam out of the dust of the earth, but he didn't have to. He could have made a silicon avatar, or could have made say there's some alien planet that has completely different chemicals, and the animals and creatures on it have completely different biochemistry. You'd have a body that was made of something else. So it's not that it's just made of dirt. It's made of physical stuff, and dirt happens to be one example of physical stuff. So you have spirit plus physical avatar equals soul. Okay. So when you see this, you can actually suddenly understand what they're talking about by spirit and soul. The soul is the part of it's the spirit being projected into an avatar, and it's you don't normally experience space-time life in this sort of atemporal fashion. You experience this flow of time, you experience yourself being located in space and so on. But in reality, your spirit is it's not there. It's up with God and so on. It's
wow.
That's the spirit is the part of consciousness outside space-time. The soul is the part that is being localized into an avatar.
It's really interesting when we have the whole simulation idea and the avatar idea. I mean, and then you see the movies, of course, right? I mean, we're seeing the Avatar, and now, now it just helps me to understand, like, okay, here's a guy sitting on a bed somewhere. His brain is being, zapped up to the body. And while he's in that body, that alien body, he doesn't think about his human body. He doesn't think about that.
That's a very good example. It's Jake Sully was his name, I think, right? So he's in his little bed there, and that would be akin to, by analogy, that would be akin to his spirit, and that blue Navi body he's walking around is his body, and then himself as the person inside the avatar body is his soul, so to speak, by analogy. It's a really kind of cool. If I make a video on, I made one on the soul before, but I want to make one on the afterlife at some point, and in order to explain, when scientists will point out that, say my grandma, actually I saw this directly because my grandmother died of Alzheimer's, and before she died, her mind decayed, right? And this is often used as evidence for materialism. Well, the mind decays, and then obviously if it decays enough, it's going to be vegetative, and then there's obviously going to be no consciousness after death and so on. And, well, that's not quite true. The soul decays, yes, But then the thing is, all the information is conserved, and then it just gets re-entangled with the spirit outside space-time. And, well, then all this, you see with, near-death experiences, all this stuff is very lucid, and, they have, like, almost no brain activity, and then suddenly they have this life review where all this huge amounts of information comes back all at once.
I just thought of a way to kind of understand what you're saying. The spirit is sort of like the data up in the cloud. And then when I pull it to my computer, it's the soul, and of course the actual plastic and metal of my computer would be that body. Physical body. So that's I kind of like that. That's
I'm gonna if I do this, so I'm gonna explain the whole spirit soul thing to explain how your mind loses. My grandmother gets Alzheimer's, and her brain, her consciousness seems to die. And then after death, it just re-entangles with the spirit outside space-time, and all the information comes back. And if I do that, I'm going to have to use the Avatar movie as the analogy, because that's just you bring that up was perfect. It's like, Jake Sully in the tube there is his spirit. In the Avatar is his soul, and the Avatar itself is the body.
That is so cool. Well, man, I want to thank you for coming on. Thank you for blowing our minds. Everybody, you can go to Johann Rotz's, is it Rotz?
Rotz.
Okay, his YouTube channel. Maybe just spell your name for everybody.
JOHANANRAA, 2 A's, TZ, Z as in zebra.
Awesome. I'm going to put that in the description of this this show. So make sure to check out his stuff. Go and subscribe to his channel. He's got some great videos there. I started watching him late one night, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's blowing my mind. Stop it. All right, and it's so fun, this stuff. It's so exciting to see how when we allow our minds to just say, what, maybe there's something more than the Bible. I mean, the Bible is sufficient to understand God, right? But it's not the sum total of all there is to know about God, right? And scientists and physicists and all these other people have been studying all their different fields rather divorced from God, and now they're coming upon these discoveries and saying, oh my goodness, something is out there. And we spiritual religious people, whatever, Christians, are like, well, yeah, we've been trying to tell you that for a long time, but they're helping us to understand concepts that haven't always made sense, and hopefully some of our stuff can help them to maybe connect some of those dots. But again, it's really cool to just chew on this stuff with you. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and everyone, do go to his channel, check it out, subscribe, and we're going to have you back on, because there's of course a ton more that we can talk about.
Oh yeah,
I'm afraid we're out of time for this episode. So
yeah. My Patreon is up in the corner there. It's JF Rotz.
Awesome. Yeah, so check that out, and maybe next time we can talk about miracles, because I know you did a whole video on miracles.
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be really fun.
Planned. I'm still working on a detail, because I deduced part of it way back, and I found the reasoning, but I'm trying to decipher what I did exactly. But I have a script going for I can deduce the Trinity out of this actually as well.
Oh my!
Yeah,
that is cool.
It's quite remarkable, but it's
yeah.
The whole notion that you see this in Thomistic philosophy. I'm sure there's some Christian apologists out there that this notion of Holland-Merism, where the whole is contained in the parts essentially, and there's no one part can be separated from the other. And the information, you see the same with holograms. Use a bit of information in one spot, and that can define the whole, and so on. And there's a way to actually, the same thing applies with integrated information theory, and you can actually derive the concept of the Trinity from this notion of it's the three being contained in the one, and so on.
That is so cool.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, again, we are out of time. If people are interested, my book, Corrupting the Image, I actually deal with some of the things about the Trinity. I deal with just thinking about some of my appendices. I talk about the creation of evil and what that may have looked like.
What's the book about?
This is, well, ultimately it's about the seed of Satan versus the seed of the woman, and so I get into the whole question of who are the Nephilim, and what I think the mark of the beast is going to be. I think it's going to be a genetic transformation.
Actually, I think it is too. There's kind of spooky topic about this, but DNA is actually in a state of entanglement, and there's another topic about this that I won't get into here right now, but there could be a spiritual dimension to DNA, shall we say.
Oh, I would totally agree with that. I would totally agree with that.
It wouldn't be something that's spooky
Yeah.
or mystical. It could be made sense of in light of what I just described today. So,
well, you know, that again, that's the exciting thing, is that all of these things start to come to coalesce, and you start to see that not only at the subatomic level, but at the DNA level. I mean, what is DNA ultimately? It's information, right? That's, I mean, we have hardware, but we have software as well, and
Yep.
so it's information, and that's a major crux of my argument. It's information. So, well, again, thank you, Johanan. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and we'll have you on soon, because I want to continue discussing some of these things. Everyone, go check out his channel, and until next time, please do stay in the Word. Take care.